Which one of you would, if you had your choice, and they said 2 doors marked heaven, hell, and you were given your choice, and you're standing there, which way would you go? In there you hear the sound of lutes playing. You hear the sound of heavenly choruses, singing on and on. And over here in this door you hear, woo! Woo-wee! Woo! There you stand, faced by the reality. Which would you pick? All right, folks, all together, all of those in favor of the whoopee hollowers, let's hear it. Hey, wait a minute, where's the horn? He missed it. All right, let's go. Hold it there, hold it, everyone there. Grab a hold of the handlebars there, easy now. Get your mitt out. Who wants to knock out some flies tonight? How about a game of catch? Okay, there are the 2 doors. One marked heaven, the other marked hell. In fact, I suspect that most of us today would consider it a rotten, dirty, calumnious lie if we arrived at that great bar of justice beyond the pearly gates. And they look down at you and they start going through that big book. They look right at you. They say, well, you're here at last, aren't you? Yes. 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 And he looks down with that great flowing white beard and says, let's take a look at your record. Do you remember April 13th, 1949? No, actually. April 13th, 1949. He says, well, we remember it. Let's see. Do you remember July 7th, 1953? A 1951 Mercury? You were in the front seat on your way to Howard Johnson's. Do you remember that night? He said, yeah. Oh, it was great, yeah. There's a quiet pause. And then that great figure looks down and says, okay, take them to heaven. You look up. Wait a minute. Suddenly you feel cheated. The others knew something you didn't know. Suddenly their sin was more dynamic than yours. By the way, wouldn't you like to be the first in your neighborhood to discover a new sin? I mean, before they made it illegal. And you're in there quietly, in the front porch there, next to the swing, performing your own sin. And they don't know about it, you're trying to hide it, and then you try to get it patented. Everyone wants to... All right, stop it down there. All right, now all set out there, Marty? All right, eins, zwei, vier. Yes. All right, now. All together, gang. Let's hear it with real hate. Just pour it out of those nice, friendly American faces. Let's hear it! Excelsior, you fatty! Hold it. Oh, at ease! When I say at ease in this outfit, I want you to shut up. All right, parade rest. And now, WOR, recognizing the fact that it does have a public responsibility, and also recognizing that its public responsibility does not stop with merely telling you the time of day and the weather on the John Gambling Show, it recognizes that there is nothing needed so much in this world than a genuine escape valve. Something we all need in this day of the dynamic nice guy. Do you know that millions of kids in schools everywhere are being taught to adjust? To be friendly little guys. Oh yeah, they're no matter what happens, they got to understand it. And so this little lout comes up to him. And by the way, this is a man thing. I'm looking at nothing but the men. I don't think this happens to the women. How many men in this crowd? Oh, every one of you had to have it. That fantastic unforgettable moment of truth that is right with you now, sticking to the ribs, like oatmeal. That moment of truth that happens to every male when some guy comes up to you on the playground and says, "All right, knock it off. Knock it off my shoulder. Come on, knock it off." What's the matter, you chicken? You know that moment, men, when you either got to knock it off the guy's shoulder or else forevermore carry a fantastic load of guilt. How many guys here in this crowd didn't knock it off the shoulder and tried to understand? Well, I understand that you are a product of an aggressive environment. You say to Bolus Rakowski. And he said, "What was that?" And you say, "Well, I don't believe in violence." And at that moment, you start picking teeth out of your ears. And you know that terrible feeling of going home after this public disgrace and arriving home, your shirt is torn open. There's dirt on the side where you landed in the cinders, Your elbow is belted and bulging out. You got a cut under your eye. And your mother says, "You've been fighting. You've been fighting. You've been cringing." I'll tell you, there's very few fighters in this world. There's a lot of duckers. There's a lot of guys that try to hide under the cinder tracks. And I don't think women have this. I don't think they know this problem. Well, I received a note about 3 days ago that said that next week is National Back to School Week. How many little squirts out there in the darkness are waiting? They see that day coming, their tag, is coming closer and closer. Of course, girls love it. Somehow chicks almost invariably love it. This is part of their world because somehow I think the world of understanding things and loving things and being sweet, getting your own way with your own little stainless steel fangs, hidden under gold lame. This is the girl's world, really. It's a girl's world. Oh, it ain't that way out on the playground. Believe me, the kids are fighting for every inch. Have you ever gone to your right for a ground ball and some guy sticks out his foot and down you go? And he stands there looking at you. Yeah. National Back to School Week. Let us, for one brief moment, consider the terror that is being felt by millions of little kids right now, knowing that they are about to be publicly disgraced. Have you ever had the feeling that life itself is a continuing pattern, a continuing process of attempting to evade embarrassment? Just to stop being embarrassed. That's what education is, really, If you can learn everything about Greek literature, they'll never embarrass me. You don't give a damn for the Greeks, What do you care about the Odyssey, the Iliad? Nothing. Somehow, if things get rough, you can say, well, as Aeschylus said, attempting to evade the issue. Guys learn to finger paint. People go to movies. Millions of people go to plays every week here in New York to prevent the embarrassment of not going. Honestly to admit, I think Albie is, what is this? Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? Come on. Who wants to say that? And so it goes. Well, tonight, I decided before we got on the air to try, because I'm so tired of books where they talk about how beautiful it is. Your happy days are childhood days. Forget it. Oh, man, these are the scariest days of a guy's life, and you know it. But we never admit it. And I can remember one of the things that I will carry forever, and I think most kids today miss this, because schools are almost all devoted to one thing. Don't make the little lout feel insecure. When, as a matter of fact, that's what he needs more than anything else. Because I believe this is an insecure world. That's the way life is, Lightning bolts, thunderstorms, hail, Mack trucks, fist fights in the dark. the whole scene. But when a kid gets out of school today, he's not prepared for it. Well, I came out of another world. I came out of Mr. Pittinger's world. Isn't that a hateful name, Pittinger? Just think of it. Say it to yourself, Pittinger. Pittinger. This isn't Wally Peepers. This is Pittinger. Well, Mr. Pittinger taught algebra at Hammond High. And Mr. Pittinger had one of those bland, it's hard to describe, the kind of iron gray hair that's cut low. He had absolutely no emotion. None. I don't recall one moment Mr. Pittinger ever smiling. But I do remember one thing about Pittinger. He'd stand up by the board. He had this kind of a stance. And he just looked down. There I am, you know, sitting about 28 rows back. My name was S, you know. Guys, I think a whole lot, have you ever noticed a whole lot of people never get ahead because their names are at the back of the alphabet? I'm serious. In all schools, they sit you by alphabet, and if your name is X and Y, you never heard of a president whose name started with Y, you know. It's never going to work. You're too far away from the board. You can't see anything. You're faking it all your life, you know, and you're way back there, and you're sitting back with the X's and the Y's and the W's and the, you know, and there I am, way back with the S's. And I could just see this shadowy figure standing up there. Speaking of shadowy figures, that was interesting. So soon yet already. What's happening out there? Well, I remember all summer. Now, because this show is going to be directed particularly to kids that are making the transition from grade school to high school or from high school to college. When you're in 8th grade, you know, you're an 8th grader. You've made the scene. You know, Mrs. Bailey, you're the top kid in grade school. There's a feeling of you're on top of it. Well, this was the way it was when I was in 8th grade. Everything worked. I was the biggest kid. I was a short, fat kid. Was wide. I weighed 205 in the 8th grade. I just push guys over. Just go like that. Yeah, a short bullet head. I hit them like that. And I was on the 8th grade football team. Just hit guys. A little short run. I was like a little bowling ball with feet, you know. And I was. You know, my mother always referred to me as Husky. You know how the ads say the short, stout, husky lad. Actually, they mean the little, short, fat slob. And, you know, too many helpings of mashed potatoes and red cabbage they're eating away. So I'm this little fat, and I just hit him, you see. Well, all of a sudden, it's that great summer. I'm out of grade school, and I'm about to go into high school. Well, I'm all excited, you know, that fantastic excitement. And the high school was all the way across town and was a big one. 3,000 kids, one of these great big brick plants with a football field. You know, that whole scene. I came out of this little grade school where they had buildings called portables. You ever seen those little wooden buildings, you know, and things? Everything's under control. And there at the other end of town was Hammond High. And, this is a big thing, right? It's about 3,000 kids in the school. Tremendous school. But yet, the reality of life in 8th grade had not yet seeped in. I thought it was an extension of Mrs. Bailey, my 8th grade homeroom teacher. You know, was a little short, fat mother type. She'd sit up there, you know, and she was always crying and things like that. Oh, yeah, that kind of thing. And she knew us all by our first names and knew our mothers and that whole scene. You know, it was just like going from one mother to another. And Mrs. Bailey would sit there in her dewlaps and wiggle, and she'd look down. Well, school was a pleasant, warm thing. And I got the card about this time of the year, the registration card, and it said, "You are now registered in room 220, homeroom, Miss Snyder. Report to Miss Snyder, 8 a.m., the day after Labor Day, which came on a Sunday." And there it was, you know. Already I'm behind, you know. It says report at 8 o'clock, and somehow the name Miss Snyder sounded like Mrs. Bailey, you know, Miss Snyder. Well, at 8 o'clock, I'm sharp, I'm dressed, in my best graduation suit from 8th grade, with the tinfoil tie, the big wide one, standing there with the whole scene. Why is it that mothers believe that they should dress a kid up on his first day of school, thereby scarring him for life? How many guys dress up their first day at work? And so I'm all dressed up, and I'm wearing this little short coat and the whole scene. I'm fat, and I arrive. Kids that are fat don't think they're fat yet, They really don't. You're not aware of these little subtleties. And I arrive at school, and here is this fantastic thing, and it was before the day, by the way. Mothers did not believe in going to school with the kids. Never go to school with the kids. And her whole attitude was summed up in one thing: you made your own bed, lay in it. You graduated from 8th grade? All right, go on. Go to Hammond High now. You asked for it. Go ahead. So I'm standing there on my way to school. Well, at 8 o'clock, now I want you to just try to, for a minute, and it's very difficult, to remember the inscrutable quality that the world has to a 13-year-old kid. It's inexplicable. It cannot be explained. It's monolithic. It's giant. And particularly when you run into the outside. Well, I arrived at Hammond High, and millions of kids, big kids, the big guys with the sweaters. And, because after all, the difference between a senior in high school, who's maybe 17 or 18, and a 13-year-old little round bowling ball arriving is a tremendous. These guys, they're all, get all the way, kid, walking in. And they got the chinos and the sweaters, and I'm wearing this little graduation suit. There's a whole bunch of other little squirts sprinkled in there, And once in a while you'd see a familiar terror-stricken face in the crowd. Hi, Al. And you see him crying. Hi, and you sort of cling together, and they say, where are you going, Al? Alex Joshua, who I hated in grade school, I'm clinging to Joshua. I said, where are you going, Joshua? He says, I don't know. I got a card. Room 117, Mr. Harris. Somehow I thought, all the kids went to the same place, Well, there we were, immediately thrown without any question into the outside world, that swirling, fantastic world of the organization. And I arrive on the 3rd floor. I mean, the school had 3 floors, millions of guys going up the elevators and stuff, and spreading out and fanning out. I'm looking, guys are chicks. Oh, wow. I can't describe to you the impact of high school girls on a 13-year-old kid who's, real high school girls, they've been around there for a couple of years, and you're used to Esther Jane Alberry, and somehow you're in the grown-ups world. You're with the people, the big people that tell dirty stories, they say, hey, kid, and you pretend like oh, boy, sitting in the back of the school bus, and the kids are telling the rotten stories, and you're going, ha, 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 and you don't know what it is you're laughing at, and they're belting you. Well, there I am, you see, in room 220, and sitting at the head of room 220 is this little, gnarled, completely self-contained lady who had run homeroom classes since about 1905. 400,000 kids have come through her own little assembly line, and she didn't relate to any of them. Just sat there. I've got my little card. It's 8:15, and the bells are ringing, and kids are all, the cool cats that have been there for years are sitting back there. Hey, Chuck, for God's sakes, hey, what are you doing around? Looking around, way in the back. My name begins with S. I'm in the last seat already. And I'm trying to make contact. And Miss Snyder gives us our indoctrination. It consisted of this. All of you will come up now and get your registration cards. You seniors, you juniors and sophomores have registered last spring, so you'll get the cards in the classes that you've registered for. The incoming freshmen will be given their cards. You're already assigned to classes. All right, now, starting with you, Abel. Come on, let's go. The kids get up, they're that nice, wonderful, easy, casual quality of the people who know the jungle. Have you ever taken a new job And all those people seem to know everything. It's all smooth. I'll bet a lot of you sitting right here in the Limelight feel a lot of these other people sitting around know the scene, you know? You know, this is their scene. And so these kids all get up and they walk through and they get the cards. And I get this card. Let me tell you what happened. It scarred me for life. I get this card. And it said the first hour had it all listed, you know. 8 periods of classes. And at 8:35, Shepard was to appear at Biology 1. Biology 1, you know, just freshman course, Biology 1. And next to it said Miss Crystal Reader. You know, this is not exactly the same as arithmetic. You don't want to say to Miss Snyder, what is biology? And right after that, it said Algebra 1. Algebra 1. I am saying that for the full import to sink into any other ex-victims out there. X plus Y equals 1. Determine the value of X and determine the value of Y. D over X is equal to Y over C times L equals 17. Well, it said Mr. Pittinger. These names were just names, you know, at that point. Mr. Pittinger, Mr. Pittinger, Miss Crystal Reader. Then there was somebody named Mr. Harris who Josway tangled with. And then at just before noon, it said swimming. Miss M.L. Scott. I repeat, Miss M.L. Scott. Well, I had an inkling something was a little wrong, you know. Even the creature that is unschooled in the jungle knows, you know. Oh, yeah, we're all human. You know, I said, well, you know, I'm just a little kid. I'm sitting back there, and the bell rings, and everybody goes. Boom, you know, they go out. There's that great... And I'm in the hall. The next thing I know, ooh, you know, and the kids are running. You know, my mother had given me a notebook. You know, what are you going to do with a notebook, you know? Notebook, you know, I got a notebook. So, I'm on my way to Biology 1, you know. It's like, here it comes. I'd stand there in front of it, and there's the room, number 17, and you can smell the smell of a biology laboratory. You know, it's like an old gym in heat. And that's spelled with a G-Y-M. It's not Jim. We know old Jim. It's all right. He's been in heat since he was 12. It's okay, friends. It's terrible. I don't know what's the matter here. So I'm in. Here I am, you know, with Crystal Reader. Now, in my high school, they had teachers who were diametrically opposed to the grade school teachers. Miss Crystal Reader. Do any of you now? It's going to sound like I'm inventing this. I'm telling you, this is the God's honest truth. Do you remember The Bride of Frankenstein? I'm serious, with the hair that sticks up. Well, Miss Reader had hair that stuck straight up, and it had a white streak down the middle. And she was maniacally involved and, in fact, in love with the Anopheles mosquito. Oh, yeah, it's the only thing that made her go, you know. She'd talk about the life history of the swamp. She had a thing. Well, I walk in, and it's completely opaque to me. You know, I'm sitting back there, and the kids, and she's talking about notebooks. She's talking about workbooks. They don't have workbooks in 6th grade. Talking about laboratory. She says, you got to get a laboratory notebook, workbook. Go down to the bookstore, get number 16, ask for the laboratory workbook number 1. And I'm sitting, she pulls down the chart, and she says, now, the first thing that we're going to take up, I want you to get your workbook. First thing we're taking up is the mechanics of reproduction, which is something I had been wondering about, you know. And I thought for the first time, you know, school's making sense. You know, this was not quite like civics. It was. And so she says, all right, and by the way, she was the kind of lady, whenever she mentioned certain things, got very red. And so she says, the quality... Now, all right, she says, now, all of you are going to get your workbooks, and on Friday afternoons, we'll have a laboratory session. Yeah? Well, we'd had a few lab sessions up to that point in 7th grade. I'll never forget one night after. But there it was, and you know, it's the feeling of being totally inadequate. Have you recognized within your own experience. There's always at least 9 people in any new situation seem to have been there before. You know what I mean? You go into a typing class and 8 kids can type 40 words a minute already, automatically. They got, You go to an English lit class, they've read all of Shakespeare. And they're on speaking terms with the teacher, first name basis, right away. And there's about 9 kids who've made the scene. They're all saying, "Oh, Miss Reader, would you please, blah, 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 blah." And she said, "Yes, I'm glad you asked that, Chester." Chester already, it's Chester, and I'm back there, this little blot in the horizon in the darkness, next to the mosquito tank. I'm sitting there. By the way, speaking of mosquito tanks, what radio station is this, friends? AM and FM, New York. By God, it's New York. I don't want anybody to mistake it. This is the Big Apple. Well, I'm sitting back there, just completely opaque. The whole first class goes by me without any context at all. Nothing. I'm just in a whirl. The second class comes up, and let me tell you, it was diametrically opposed. Now, I'm not inventing this. I'm telling you an actual story of the first feeling of imminent disaster. And total failure is looming over the horizon. And it's coming closer and closer to you like a Greek tragedy. It's like an enormous iceberg coming at you. You can't go either way. It stretches 20 miles. And I walk in and I sit down in a class. There were 36 of us. I remember distinctly because of later developments. And standing up in front of his desk with arms crossed is Mr. Pittinger. This was the first male teacher I had ever had. Up to this time, it had been a succession of Miss Baileys and Miss Fifes, and now Mr. Pittinger. I come in, and he's just standing up by the desk. Up to that point, incidentally, I had developed, as a kid, a tricky little look in my eye, which made my Aunt Kate always think I was cute. You know how kids develop little shticks? They say, my mother will say, "Well, what's the matter? Can you hear out there?" "I just want to check the PA system." Well, we had developed, all of us kids, in 8th grade, different things that made us live and exist with the Miss Fifes, the Miss Shields. Like, one kid had a great grin. Sit back there. He'd grin at everything the teacher said. He said, "This was George Doppler. He was the grinner." And absolutely complete chowderhead. There was nothing but cheesecake between the ears. But George got by with this. And Miss Shields, I remember, she just couldn't say, "Shut up, George." She'd look at him and she'd melt. Well, I got by a kind of crooked little thing that I had developed that had always gone over well with my Aunt Kate. It was the thing that my grandmother loved, a kind of little crooked thing like this. See how cute that is? Right away you love me. Look at that. The whole crowd loves me right here, Immediately I'd have come out like this. I could make the Johnny Carson show with this thing. They just say, "Dolly in on him, get it quick." I'd be a hit overnight, that little thing like, "Don't hit me, I'm just little. I'm little and fat, and I'm cute. Well, I sit back there, and I start turning it on. Well, Pittinger walked back and forth, and I could see every kid in the class is doing his shtick. Doppler is there. And other kids have little things with their ears, Some girls automatically cried, They became actresses, It's a very they sit there and cry a little bit like they're so sad about being away from home and mother, and they're in this terrible, incomprehending, insensitive world. And I'm sitting there. And Pittinger's just walking back and forth. "We're here to learn algebra." was never any question of learning in Miss Bailey's classes. It was just a matter of being, you know. You went through it. She says, we're here to learn algebra. Our textbook is this. And he had this little, rotten, sweaty, brown book that he began to pass out, one after the other. You know, you're used to, you know, the books you get in school, in grade school, which shows Johnny and Jill running over the hill to get 7 red apples, and it shows the red apples, you know. Well, I start looking through the algebra book for the pictures, you know. You know, a kid immediately gets a line on how rotten it's going to be by the illustrations. You know, I look at nothing. There's a lot of numbers and stuff. You know, example 1 and numbers. I'm going to, and you could see. You see, we had the school system where the books were owned by the city. You know, they were used by one generation after the other. And I got this fantastic tear-stained book. You know, you could just see it was suffering. You know, it was like some ancient runic tablet. You know, that suffering and weeping had gone into this thing. And I get this book, and I'm sitting back there, and Pittinger says, now, algebra is the language of symbols. I will now draw on the board a symbol. That is a symbol. Not one of us even knew what the word symbol meant, you know. The language of what? You know what? We thought of guys going boing, boing, you know. About 9 kids played the cymbal in our little band, you know, back in 4th grade, you know, where they hit tin cans together, you know. Beat on Mother Oak tins and stuff like that, you know. He said, this is a symbol. Okay. That's simple enough. This is a symbol. Why? There's 2 of them. It's getting confused already, you know. Here's another symbol, C. Now, X plus Y equal C. That is an equation. Already my boat is down, it's sinking. The water is up to my knees and I'm bailing, you know. I'm looking up. My mother had one word for me when I left. She says, now listen to the teacher. I'm listening like mad, you know. Already I'm about a semester and a half behind. X plus Y equals C. He says, now, if X is equal to 1 and Y is equal to 2, what is C equal to? 1, what is X equal to? And he looks around, and you know that look that teachers have of looking for a victim? And every guy immediately gets little, you know, or gets very busy or very involved, you know. It's that evading embarrassment right away, and I'm very involved, you know. And he says, you, the back one over there. And he's got Joshua. Well, there is Joshua standing up, and you can see the harpoon right through him. You know, the poor little kid, he's up, he says, I didn't hear the question. Already the kid's on his way, you know. He's in Congress now, by the way. He's already got the evasive action going. You know, he's got dust flying. So I didn't hear the question. Well, Mr. Pittinger says X equals 1, Y equals 2. What does C equal if X plus Y equals C? There's a long pause. And Joshua said, 1 what? Oh, listen to him here. They're applauding the chutzpah, his kid. He says, 1 what? He says, all right, sit down. And Joshua sits down. Ooh, what relief, you know. He says, sit down. All right, now you. And he gets little Esther Jane Albury. Well, she was a weeper. And she stands up and she says, 3. He said, what? She says, if X is equal to 1 and Y is equal to 2, then C must be 3. He says, correct. Every one of us was dumbfounded. Completely. This was the first time Esther Jane had answered a question. We knew her for 19 years in grade school. Little did we realize she was in her element. And all the smart kids are sunk. Little dumb Esther Jane she's got it knocked in algebra. It's a new language, And I says, what? Everything is crumbling. It's like the little dumb kid is suddenly the star. The kid that's a star is suddenly a bum. I didn't know what to make, and I'm sitting back there like this, and Pittinger is walking around, just looking down. Not a flicker of emotion. What a teacher! He was great. No, I'll tell you. There was never anything I learned like algebra. It's fantastic. I do equations in my sleep sometimes. When a siren goes past, and there's a little fear, I say X plus Y. I say quantitative analysis, Mr. Pittinger. I start whipping out equations, triple equations. I can do them all, believe me. And so Pittinger walks back and forth, and he said, all right, by tomorrow afternoon, when we will meet the next time, I want you to do number 1, 3, 6, and 9. I want you to skip every other example in the first section of basic equations. Are there any questions? Have you ever had that asked you? And your questions are so big. So, the first question is, what am I doing here, Mr. Pittinger? Don't hit me, please. Please, Mr. Pittinger, are you going to beat us? Nothing. He said, any questions? There were none. Well, as we filed out, it was wild to see. It was that first feeling that it's an old familiar one with me now. That feeling of a large number of people who are with it and a small but tight minority of the lost and defeated. Guess where I was? And we all sort of walked out, and there were a lot of kids with the spring, and I was scared. Oh, boy, this is terrible. And then the next class, we go into something called Geography 1. And I'm thinking, geography is about the principal exports of Asia are rice. That kind of stuff. The principal export of America is fun. That kind of stuff. And they start talking about meanders and moraines and strata of rock. And, oh, wow, this is at school, Mom. What a time, Well, by that night, I get home, and my mother says, I am terrified. I can't tell you how fantastic terror in my gut. It's that sickness. That sickness in your gut that you're going to get called on? That terrible thing? Well, I get home, and my mother says, how was school? I said, it's fun. Just fun. She says, well, how do you like being in high school with all the big kids? It's fun. She says, well, why don't you go out and play? There I am sitting near the hot air register. The first time in my life I, honest to God, worried. I was worried sick. Well, the next day we go in, and I can't understand X plus Y minus B is equal to 4 over 2. I can't. What is this stuff? I just makes no sense. That terrible feeling of no sense, and you ad-lib it. You start writing things like XY plus 1 equal 2, and you go in the back where it says answers. And you try to figure it out from the answer how they got it, And you can't quite make it, and I get 1, and I say, oh, wow, it's a fantastic feeling. And the next day I arrive. I hand in my paper that's just covered with stuff. The kid learns very early in life to ad-lib. How many guys listening to me right now are in offices and you are phoning every last lousy report you ever made? I know guys that are phoning presentations to this day up on Madison Avenue. Just tremendous volumes of wonderful things that are happening, and they have no relationship to what's going on. They say, in the beginning there was. Well, there I am. I hand the paper in, and it comes back the next day with red lines drawn through them. And it said, work the problem. That's all it said. Work the problem. 1 right. Well, we're already now on Thursday, you see. and they have given us 3 more papers. They start coming back, and they start piling up, work the problem. And I keep ad-libbing, and he never says a word. And therein lay the greatest trap I've ever run into. Pittinger never called anybody in. He never looked angry. He just sending the papers back. Well, it began to build up, and about, I'd say, roughly the middle part of November, I figured I was pulling it over him. That I figured I was on my way. I had passed about 3 of those little exams, they give, the little bits, the little things on Wednesday. He says, we'll have an oral exam. What is X and Y? And you answer it. You say, I'm home free. Until, I'd say, the last week of November. And it is to those kids that I'm directing this. Our grades were coming out just before Christmas. And Mr. Pittinger, one day, had written on the board 17 names. I came in, I'm real, by now I'm real snotty. I know everything. High school, I know it all. I'm out for freshman football and I'm hitting guys again, I feel real good. I come in and there's all those names, you see. I look, I'm used to my name being on lists. It's funny how kids, as they come up through grade school, develop the idea that they're always on the honor list. Whenever their name is appearing, it's a good thing. Like they're going to make the scenery for the play. They're going to do something good. And here were those 17 names. Mr. Pittinger opened the class. He said, now before we go on with the lessons in quadratics, isn't that a terrible word even now to some? He said, before we go into quadratics again, these people here on the board, please see me immediately after class. Whose name led all the rest? There it was. There was Alex. There was George Doppler. There were other poor, simple, penitent travelers who figured that their smile had done it by now, you see. Because he never did anything. He never said anything. He didn't hit. He didn't lash out. He just looked as bland. By the way, Esther Jane Albury was like 7 laps ahead of the class, and he looked as mad at her as he did Doppler. This is where it happened, the euchre, This was the final cul-de-sac. And so after the class, everybody walks out, and there are the 17 of us sitting there. Each one of us has got his thing. Yeah. He had culled out of the class the 17 phonies. And we're all sitting there, with our bit. Guys that got the ear, One guy, done a funny little thing with his pencil. And we're all working the shtick like mad, And he says, all right, all 17 of you are going to fail algebra. Boom! Wow! It was like all of a sudden you're all these little bowling pins and the ball has come, Boom! Or pow! He said, you're all going to fail algebra. It was the first time in my life that I had ever failed anything. I was notable in my family as the smart one. The smart kid, they always say, he knows I built radios and stuff like that. Somehow that's always parallel with being smart. Being a smart aleck is called being smart in many families. I'd have a smart crack. Knock it off. That kind of stuff. Your father's mustache. That kind of stuff. They says, he's smart one. Say something funny, Jeannie. And I'd come up with a funny bit. Pittinger was not buying. He was, and he says, all right, you are going, the group here, he says, the 17 in this group are going to fail algebra. Now that will mean that you will take algebra again next semester. He said, I will tell you this. If you will complete the problems and the questions and the examples that all of you have not completed during the semester, you will get a D. That means I got to do the whole semester of the stuff I phoned up, and only then would I get a D. It's like telling you if you come here and confess We'll only cut off your ears. Oh, what a moment. You know, I can imagine myself going home and saying, you know, what are you going to say? That is the, then, crux of it. Home. How many of you have hidden things from home throughout all of your life? If they really knew what you're doing here in the big city, how can you explain it, you know? Well, there I am going home from school. Mr. Pittinger has given all of our papers back, and he has just walked out of the room. There's no mercy. There's no turning back. And so we're riding back on the bus, and here are these other kids. The kids who are home scot-free. And they're happy. Have you ever had that feeling of seeing other people that are happy, and you've got a weight on you? It's like you suspect you got cancer. And you say, look at him, he's healthy. Yeah, he's right. He's going to live another 6 weeks, you know. Yeah, you know, everybody's got, you know, of course at that point anyway, at about 13 years old, you never think you're going to reach 21 anyway. Every kid of 13 thinks he's going to die before he gets to be 21. And in addition to that, if he doesn't, he will go blind. And when he goes blind, he will do it heroically. You know, and then they'll feel sorry. Either that or you figure your mother and father are going to die. You know, it's all tied up. And so I'm in the bus, and I'm sitting there, and ooh, wowie, what a fear. What a sick fear. The fear of that note coming home, Jeannie has failed algebra. I've been on every known list of good guys ever since I was 5. Now I am failing. And I sit back there at home eating my red cabbage and my hamburger. My kid brother is making with the, you know, that happy sound. The sound of people who are not about to die. And he's sitting there eating the red cabbage. I'm sick. I can't eat. My mother says, what's the matter? What's your food? Come on now, eat, Jeannie. Are you sick? Aren't you feeling? I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good. You kids, I'm flunking algebra. I'm a rotten, stinking phony all those weeks when I sit in the front bedroom with them papers. I'm making model airplanes. I'm futzing around. I'm not doing nothing. I'm just No. A phony is a phony to the last. And I'm saying nothing, Ma, nothing. Hey, wait, excuse me, Pete. Nothing, Ma. Well, the next day, I go back to Pittinger's class. I have done about 5 of the papers and have handed them in, and he just takes them without a word. Just without a word. And then, after 3 days of this, he said, you will know your grade after the Christmas holiday. Well, let me tell you, sitting next to that Christmas tree, my kid brother with the fire truck, you know, hey, look at that. I'm sitting there, they gave me everything, you know, and I'm sitting there, it's all ashes. I remember standing in front of Marshall Field. It's so emblazoned in my memory. We're standing in front of Marshall Fields just before Christmas. It's like the day before. And you know how these department stores have these fantastic displays, the Walt Disney bit, you know, with all the 7 dwarfs, Grumpy and Doc and everything, and Santa Claus is going, ha, 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 oh, ho, 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 Merry Christmas! And I'm looking up there. And he's laughing, and you can hear jingle bells, jingle all the way. And the happy crowds are moving up and down. And my kid brother saying, hey, Ma, gee whiz, look at that Daisy air rifle, Ma. And I'm seeing nothing. I'm standing there thinking to myself that very shortly my entire family is going to hate me. That I am a pariah. They don't know what a leper, what a rotten skunk they're with. What a rotten phony. Wait till this, I'm standing there. Well, the day finally arrives. It came closer and closer and closer and closer. And finally, there it was. I arrived in Miss Snyder's homeroom class, and she had the report cards. Friends, I want to ask you a question. How would it be at BBD&O or Y&R or wherever it is that you're phoning it up? How would it be if they started to give out a report card every semester? And they sent it home. It says deportment, concentration, drinking habits, that kind of thing. Adjustment to committee meetings, ideas, all the way down the line. Well, kids, they give out these report cards, and there they are. Do you remember that feeling of sitting in a class, and up there on the desk is a pile of yellow things, just sitting there, and you know that in that pile there is the guillotine. Or maybe there's a wreath, I don't know, but it's there. It's there waiting for you, and there's no escaping. Well, Miss Snyder said, all right, alphabetically, let's go. Abel. She gives him his 3 report cards. He comes up, that great grin. He comes running back. He's got that smile of the junior, who's really got it knocked. Sits down. Abel, Atkinson, Anderson. It's getting closer. Lemnitzer, Meyer, all the way down, and all of a sudden, there it was. Samuelson, Senderman, Shepard. That terrible feeling like something fantastic has happened in your underwear? I'm walking up. She said, come on, hurry it up. And hands me the cards. And I go back and sit down. Biology 1. That's nothing, I love biology with the worms and the frogs and the reproduction. This is my meteor, B+. I look like this. Here it is, algebra 1. I open it up. C. I'm home free. Miss Snyder, I passed. I got a C. I sat back down in my seat, and that cold sweat. I have fooled them again. I have fooled them again. Listen to the phonies applauding here. And speaking of fooling them again, we're here at the Limelight down in Greenwich Village. We'll be here for another hour. If you want to make the scene, come on down. Even now, you can hear them yelling with that fantastic sound of hate. Listen to it. We'll be forward a mob. Phonies, everyone, all algebra students here. We'll be back in 5 minutes after the news.
This is WOR New York, your station for news.